You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 575, The Haunting of Deck 12.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Norman Lau.
And I'm John Champion. Each week on Mission Log, we tell you a story. It's a story from Star Trek, and it may be true or it may be completely made up, but we do know for sure that we'll look at any morals, meanings, and messages hiding in that nebula, and we'll see if the whole thing stands the test of time.
This week, The Haunting of Deck 12, the one where Neelix asks a bunch of kids if they like scary stories and then proceeds to freak himself out, recounting her dangerous alien encounter. John, welcome. Are you ready for a ghost story?
I am ready. I'm ready for a ghost story.
All right, we're going to be sitting around. We're going to be lighting our lanterns, if you will, in this spacious cargo deck.
Oh, yeah, we're doing this, creepy flashlight underlighting the whole time, I swear.
That's right. Inspired by David Livingston. So we're going to get a little bit that just right in a moment because John's going to be back with trivia. But first, here's how you can reach us with your own ghost story. We'd love to hear from you. Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Find us on Facebook at Mission Log Pod and on Instagram and Threads at Roddenberry Podcasts. The conversation always continues in the Mission Log Discord with near daily live events and 24/7 chat about the topics you love. Get your invitation to our private server by joining patreon.com/missionlog. While you're at it, one of the most important ways to help your favorite podcasts is to leave a 5-star rating and a review at Apple or your preferred podcast platform. And remember, your comments or ghost stories can be used on a future show. But now, here's John Champion with this week's haunting. Trivia. This week's trivia.
Here we go. All right, the haunted trivia for The Haunting of Deck 12. We have a story by Mike Sussman, and we haven't seen his name too frequently, so here's a little refresher. Mike was a fan turned freelance writer, and he sold 2 scripts earlier in Voyager's run. Those would be Meld in the 2nd season and Swarm in the 3rd season. From here, though, Mike is ready to join the production full-time, and we will see a lot more of him in Voyager's final year before he jumps over to an even longer run on Enterprise. The teleplay duties, then, were assigned to Mike Sussman, of course, Ken Biller, and Brian Fuller, so probably not a surprise to see a couple of our veteran writers jump in and give this one a clean-up before it was camera-ready. Speaking of that camera, it was directed by David Livingston, and here's our veteran Trek director coming in for his last assignment of the season. This comes after he helmed Spirit Folk several episodes ago, and David will be back for 3 more episodes of Voyager in the final season before making the jump over to Enterprise. Now, The Haunting on Deck 12 was nominated for an Emmy in the category of Outstanding Special Visual Effects. And we have so many returning guest stars in what is a bottle show. And actually, for that matter, the episode reused some special effects from previous episodes, like the macrocosm and the child. And I guess that makes sense as we get closer and closer to the end of the season. And maybe they just want to save some of that budget so they could throw more of it at the finale. But speaking of our guest stars, we have all 4 of our Borg kids again sitting around listening to a ghost story as presented by Neelix. And although Naomi Wildman gets name-checked, she does not actually appear in the episode. And for the second time, for the first time, if you're paying attention to the timeline, we have Bajoran crew member Tal Seles, played again by Zoe McClellan. And unfortunately, this is the last time that we will see her on Star Trek.
Welcome to the Delta Quadrant. Buckle up for the one where Neelix scares small children. On purpose this time.
Prologue. On an eerily quiet night on Voyager, Neelix seems anxious as he walks around the empty mess hall. He's startled when Seven walks in to ask for a favor just as he's leaving. Voyager will be shutting down main power for several hours to do something. That means the regeneration chambers will be offline, and that means Uncle Neelix needs to watch the Borg kids and keep them occupied while Seven and the rest of the crew are up to whatever it is the adults do that is dangerous and important. And the kids don't know about it, by the way. On the bridge, the crew note their arrival at a creepy-looking nebula, and Voyager's power shutdown sequence begins. All over the ship, lights and workstations go dark, and the warp core is taken offline. The Borg kids wake up startled, mid-regeneration, but Neelix is there to tell them everything is all right. From the bridge, Janeway calls to Seven, "We're ready." Act 1. Voyager is running dark, literally. In Cargo Bay 2, the kids are already starting to raise questions about the sudden blackout, so Neelix gives them some dubious explanation about reducing EM emissions while traveling through a nebula. Icheb isn't buying it. Why cut power when the shields already handle that? Neelix tap dances around their questions a little more, but then Mazzotti brings up the supposedly haunted Deck 12. That gets everyone's attention. Neelix tries to deny it, but eventually gives in, promising to tell them what really happened. Cue the flashback. Several months ago, before the kids joined the crew, Voyager was parked in another J-class nebula collecting deuterium. Neelix was on edge from the turbulence and eerie surroundings, found himself seated with Tuvok in the mess hall, attempting small talk to distract from his nerves. He said the nebula reminded him of a terrifying childhood plasma storm back home on Talax, something he never forgot. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the crew experienced a sudden jolt. Harry noted it could have been caused by nadion emissions from the Bussard collectors, which Icheb in the present helpfully points out wouldn't actually come from the Bussard collector, and Chakotay suggested that they cut their losses and leave the nebula with only 80% of their desired fuel. Janeway agreed. But just as they prepared to exit, Voyager was rocked again. A web of energy spread across the ship. Though damage seemed minimal, something had slipped aboard. As Voyager pulled away, something attached itself to the hull. Act 2. As Neelix continues the story, the kids play Guess the Alien, trying to figure out what kind of life form might have boarded Voyager. Neelix gently shuts down the guessing games and carries on, picking up just after the ship exited the nebula, when things on board started to go sideways. Chakotay had brought Janeway the damage report. A transporter was down, sonic showers were glitching, and artificial gravity had failed on Deck 5. Janeway tried to replicate a cup of coffee, and that was a mess too. Literally. The replicator spat out a coffee-shaped puddle and then an empty cup. And Janeway noticed something else strange. The same cluster of meteoroids was outside the window that they'd passed an hour ago. Voyager was flying in circles. A quick systems check revealed the navigational sensors were malfunctioning. Tom commented how he could do so much better with analog equipment when Voyager suddenly jumped forward at Warp 6. Communications with engineering were dead, and nothing could shut down the engines. Then, as suddenly as it all started, Warp disengaged. Janeway tried hailing B'Elanna. Nothing. Chakotay headed to engineering to find her, but the turbolift had a mind of its own. After taking Chakotay to the wrong deck, it trapped him, then dropped 11 stories. The stabilizers kicked in at the last second, and when he finally reached engineering, B'Elanna was already on the case, tracking anomalies to some bioneural gel packs on Deck 13. Elsewhere, crewman Tal Sellis, hey, welcome back, was prepping a diagnostic when 7 of 9 swooped in to handle it herself, assuming Sellis was the cause of yet another systems failure. But Sellis hadn't even started. Meanwhile, B'Elanna and Chakotay followed a trail of EM energy moving through the ship's circuits and traced it to the environmental controls near Cargo Bay 2, where, later, Seven was working alone. Unaware of an EM lifeform lurking in the cargo bay, Seven ran a diagnostic at a terminal. Lights began to flicker, and Seven's scan picked up another malfunction. But before she could process it, gas from the nebula began leaking in through a vent, along with a moving web of energy. When Seven's comms failed, she headed for the exit, found herself trapped in a corridor by force fields. As the gas spilled out behind her and filled the corridor, Seven was knocked unconscious. Act 3. Neelix continues for the kids after one of those dramatic flashlight-in-the-face moments, perfect for a ghost story. Chakotay and B'Elanna found Seven in the corridor and used a phaser to disable the force field control so they could take her to sickbay. In the mess hall, Neelix was cooking, then the lights began flickering. Harry and Neelix tried to contact other parts of the ship. Nothing. Harry ordered everyone back to duty and for Neelix to stay put. Then the lights went out completely, leaving Neelix alone in the dark. System after system was failing. On the bridge, it was sweltering, and Janeway made a quiet plea for the ship to cooperate. Helm control came back, and Tom tried to restart the engine, but an EM surge built up, and too late. Tom was hit by an energy discharge and badly burned. With comms and transporters down and the air thinning, Janeway ordered the bridge evacuated. In sickbay, the doctor treated Seven, then rushed to help Tom when he was carried in by Janeway and Tuvok. As everyone compared notes, they realized this was no random failure. Something, an intelligence, had come aboard from the nebula, a life form reshaping Voyager to match its environment and attacking any resistance. Just then, the doctor's holomatrix destabilized and B'Elanna transferred him to his mobile emitter moments before sickbay lost power. Janeway ordered everyone to engineering. Elsewhere, Harry was navigating a darkened corridor when he was suddenly punched by a panicked Tal Celeste, mistaking him for an alien. Her fears assuaged that he was not an alien and they weren't under attack. They continued on together. Neelix, alone in the mess hall and hearing strange noises, grabbed a phaser and stepped into the corridor to investigate. The turbolift doors were opening and slamming shut. Then something behind him. Neelix turned and screamed, only to find Tuvok in an oxygen mask. After calming him down, Tuvok explained what he knew, and the two set off for engineering. Act 4. Neelix resumes his story. He and Tuvok crawled through the Jeffries tubes toward engineering. Neelix tried to ease the tension with a story about a doomed Talaxian freighter, and their path was soon blocked by nebula gas behind a sealed hatch, and Tuvok worked hard to try to vent it. In engineering, one of the few places with power, Janeway, Chakotay, and others regrouped. Seven and B'Elanna tried to reclaim system control, but the life form blocked them. Then the computer began reporting Janeway's location on a loop. She suspected it was the alien reaching out and ordered B'Elanna to allow access to syntax subroutines, letting the alien understand spoken language. When Janeway asked its purpose, it replied, "Go to astrometrics." So Janeway headed there with Seven. In the Jeffries tube, Tuvok helped Neelix subside his fears with a Vulcan meditation technique. It worked for a little while with Neelix thinking happy thoughts, but fear took over again, warping the memory into a nightmare. Meditation over. In astrometrics, the alien displayed the nebula it came from in Voyager's logs. It wanted to return home. Janeway agreed, and in return it restored helm control, but restricted access to Janeway alone. She goes, and according to Neelix, the captain had formed some kind of understanding with the being. But when they reached the nebula's coordinates, it's gone. The alien reacted with anger, shutting down life support and sending a message through the ship's computer, "Abandon ship." If its home was gone, it would take Voyager. Act 5. The captain's only hope, Neelix tells the kids, was to reason with the alien. She offered to find it a new nebula, but it refused, destroying helm control and blocking communications. With comms down, Janeway raced to engineering to deliver the evacuation order in person. Back in the Jeffries tube, Tuvok was still trying to vent the gas when the alien attacked him with an EM surge and filled the tunnel with more gas. Tuvok told Neelix to go on, but Neelix thought happy thoughts again and did his best to drag them both toward engineering. Janeway, still trying to reason with the alien, warned that without a crew, the ship would eventually completely fail. The alien didn't budge. Janeway returned to engineering and ordered everyone to abandon ship. Neelix and Tuvok emerged just in time. Only one shuttle remained, the one Janeway and Chakotay were to share. He boarded, but before Janeway could follow, the hatch slammed shut right in front of her. The alien had understood. It would let the crew go, but keep Janeway as a caretaker. It ordered her to engineering. She refused. It trapped her with force fields and flooded the corridor with gas, and Janeway held firm. If she died, the alien would be alone. Eventually, in this interspecies game of chicken, it relented. Power returned, systems came back online, and the alien agreed to Janeway's plan. Over the next couple of days, the crew returned. The alien was isolated on Deck 12 until a new nebula could be found. As storytime wraps up, Voyager shakes, then power returns. Neelix says the alien likely left to settle into its new home. Time for regeneration. Then Azan nervously asks, what if it came back? Neelix says he made it all up. The kids go in for regeneration, and Neelix wishes them pleasant dreams. On the bridge, Janeway and Chakotay ask how things went. Neelix says he told the kids a story. And Tom jokes, Mother Goose. Neelix says, nope, too scary. Janeway has Harry show him the nebula on screen. A small flash of light shines, and perhaps the alien is finally back home. Well, Neelix says, I hope it lives happily ever after. The end.
There's nothing like a ghost story. Well, recounting a ghost story about a ghost story.
Yeah, I think you and I should tell our audience a story about this story that is being told as a story by Neelix. Just so many meta layers, story upon story upon story.
That would literally take 12 decks that we would need to haunt.
All right, let's get into it. In our teaser segment, really important for me to point out anytime they show up on Star Trek that there is a bowl in the mess hall full of Buddha hand fruit. Those citrusy things, very hard to find, but they're cool and they always stand out to me.
So I love the way that the episode starts. It starts with kind of like a mystery, which had me ask a few questions in some of my observations this early on.
Okay.
So when Janeway stands up on the bridge and she's about to order the power outage, who are the two command, I guess that would be bridge officers that were right behind Chakotay? We've never seen them before, and they're right at 7 Station.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, just another thing where in Star Trek we know that there is always our main bridge crew and you never meet anybody else.
Right.
Unless they're going to die in that episode. But yeah.
Well, there's, speaking of two other crewmen, so two other crewmen were caught in the power outage. Did they know that they were going to get caught in the power outage, or did they have the flashlights on hand just because they're prepared?
That's a good plan. I think I might do that from now on, too.
Just curious.
Just in case. Just always have double flashlights strapped to my wrist.
Here's the big one, and I will return to this. If the Doctor is offline and Tom is piloting Voyager, if something happens, who's going to provide the medical assistance for the crew?
Samantha Wildman.
Let's pin that one.
Okay, good plan. I do like the kids just immediately being skeptical and just even throwing out things like Neelix says the story is not for the faint of heart. And then one of them says something about having, reinforced cardiac systems. That's just, it's perfectly in character. Good.
It's almost very 7 of 9-ish. In
that
way,
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
I like the return of Flotter. I like the return of the Flotter book.
Yeah. I like that we have a reference that actually connects to something else.
Also, I was kind of thinking to myself, where's Naomi? Perfect bonding time with the other 4 children.
See? Why not? Yeah. Because Samantha's in sickbay, so you need to get Naomi in with the other kids.
Naturally.
It just makes sense, Also, so I do like staying very much in character when we start the flashback and Neelix tells Tuvok, confides in him in the mess hall that he's concerned about others who are nervous from all the turbulence. That's me in a turbulent situation. Asking me, no, it's not me. I'm just concerned for everybody else. Yeah.
Your problem was the turbulence on Deck 12.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the problem.
That's it. Yeah.
So Neelix says that his story began months ago before the Borg children were brought on board. So in my mind, in my headcanon, basically this entity has been on board for like the last few weeks of episodes that we've covered.
Yeah. Because we got the kids on board going on like a couple of months ago. So you could be as far back as early season 6,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows what was going on?
Yeah, I actually use the timeline a bit. I did wonder, do you need permission from the captain to put up curtains? Do you really?
Well, it depends on the
Is it that
fabric.
important? I guess so.
Yeah. I also loved seeing the extra crew members behind, like, Neelix and Tuvok in the mess hall. I love seeing extra crew members.
Finally, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, finally. We see that again with Harry when he gives the order for people to disperse. And we have that nice kind of overhead shot. Thank you, David Livingston. It's good to see Voyager be a full ship when we can. Also, we're letting the twins talk a little bit more. I think maybe they hit the 5-line minimum, but only in short bursts and mostly in the dark. So, always down for replicator shenanigans. At least this time we didn't burn a pot roast. We just had the very clever effect of the coffee materializing before the cup. I thought that was nice.
That was like an entire K-Tel album that you just quoted right there. Yeah, Replicator Shenanigans is our band. You had all the different issues with that. Also, speaking of issues, didn't the inside of her replicator look like a badly tiled 70s bathroom?
It did. But I looked at that and I thought, how could I do this in my kitchen? Because the lighting is nice. And I was just like, okay. Time for me to get super pedantic. If I didn't bring this up, then many of the people in our audience who know more about science and astronomy than I do, they would jump right in. But you do not have a meteorite cluster. That is something that Chakotay says. Okay, so a meteoroid is the small rocky object in space. That's what Janeway calls it. She is correct. A meteor is that object entering our atmosphere and burning up and incandescing. A meteorite is that same object if it survives the trip through the atmosphere and you go find it. So Chakotay, do better. Also, sure, Tom. Yeah, you just need a window and a sextant. I don't believe you.
He just wanted to say sextant. He doesn't even know how to fix his own TV set, let alone use a sextant.
Ex-post sextant. I'm sorry.
No,
I'll go.
We're keeping
I'll go
that
home
in.
now.
We are keeping that in.
Hey, and oh my gosh, Tal Celeste, just so good to see someone again after only a few episodes. Like Voyager actually has a consistent crew of people who we can get to know, which is nice. And I also feel bad because Seven is just jumping straight to conclusions, and no wonder Tal Celeste feels insecure about her work. Because remember, this takes place before the events of Good Shepherd. So we actually know Tal Celeste from Good Shepherd and just feeling a bit of imposter syndrome and all. But of course, because at some point before, Seven's just jumping in, they're like, yeah, you screwed this up. And she's like, I just got here,
That is like some foreshadowing.
It really is, yeah. After foreshadowing, yeah, even better. I love this shot. Again, kudos to David Livingston. Such a simple shot, but those shots looking at Chakotay and B'Elanna in between the gel packs, they're kind of glowing nicely, and then you see the tricorder lights kind of out of focus, just sort of blinking a bit. It's around timestamp 17 minutes right in there, but just good-looking shots.
I mean, I thought that was great. The lightning cloud energy that was moving around Seven's cargo bay, like around the regeneration pods. I thought that was all very... It's no wonder then the nomination came for the outstanding visual effects, because they are very good in this episode.
They are good, yeah. I do wonder how often you have to change the batteries on a space lantern. It is a big lantern, and I wonder if Neelix did that on purpose.
It's a lantern in space, you're saying?
Yeah. Well, it's a space lantern, clearly.
It was that great, creepy, kind of aha, got you type of moment, because it does start like the third act. I think that David Livingston... I wouldn't say that he outdid himself. This is like classic, fantastic, consistent David Livingston directing going on here.
Yep, totally. Yep. Oh, and I did wonder that this doesn't necessarily hold up to the Star Trek logic, although it is Neelix telling the story. So I guess if there are gaps in the Star Trek logic, we can just say, well, maybe he got the details wrong.
Right.
But there's this scene where Chakotay and B'Elanna are trying to free Seven from being trapped in the force field. And Chakotay just shoots the wall panel with a low-powered phaser, and that drops the force field.
I mean,
that seems to defy everything we've ever seen about how force fields and panels work in Star Trek up to this point. really serious burn makeup on Tom. Wow. When we actually cut to that, they really went overboard there. Yeah.
I have more on that in a second. But I did love that you brought up earlier that they actually gave Harry ordering a command to other people.
Yeah, I know.
Please let me have this universe.
He belongs and he's got some seniority.
Please let me have this universe. Please let me have this. I do love seeing all of the background crew members. This is like my third reference, fourth reference to them already. They're fixing the bridge and they have like their sleeves rolled up, kind of like O'Brien.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Good stuff.
And yeah, the burns and the makeup and the energy discharge, that entire scene on Tom's face was really well done. I need to ask you permission. Can I rant about this later?
Oh, permission granted.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right.
Can't wait. I do love this line that Icheb says to Neelix, like, you shouldn't have allowed yourself to be afraid. Like, yeah, easier said than done, kid. Yeah.
He reminded me, for some odd reason, he just reminded me of like he's like the perfect age for Apollo Atreides, and it's a very fear is the mind killer type of line. I'm sure that's not where it was referenced, but it did feel kind of like that moment.
Yeah. Neelix does describe that they were crawling through pitch black, dark Jeffries tubes. They were not. There were lights on because we had to see it. So again, maybe it's just Neelix not quite getting his story right.
I love that. I guess it's like the Magna Lock tool that Tuvok uses to pry open the Jeffries tubes doors.
Yeah.
It's a nice little detail. I'm glad they bring that up from time to time.
Yeah, good stuff. And I love this bit of dialogue exchange. Goes by really fast, but Neelix, did I ever tell you about? And he's about to go into that story. And Tuvok just says, if I say yes, will it prevent you from telling the story? Fantastic.
So in main engineering, timestamp around 30 minutes, 40 seconds. So when the computer acknowledges Captain Janeway, in the background, you can see an actual science officer, a male science officer or a science uniformed crew member with a tricorder in his hand surveying the wounded that were down on the floor cots.
Oh.
So I'm wondering, is this someone who just, he volunteered because no one else was there? Because remember, the doctor's offline and Tom is badly burned.
Yeah.
So
good point.
Is someone just jumping in to help out? Or were they actually trained, and this is one of the doctor's staff that we never see?
I like to think that it is somebody who is trained. Yeah.
Here's an interesting thing. I'm surprised that there wasn't a little bit of pause in the dialogue just for kind of like the audience to catch up with his memory. So Tuvok says to Neelix, envision your lungs filled with light. And in my mind, Neelix is like, yeah, I've been there, done that. Remember the Vidians? I literally had holographic lungs.
Yeah, too soon.
Yeah.
Too soon. Yeah. I really liked his little going to his happy place, his birthday dinner. It was a nice setup. And then the, screaming nebula gas on the plate. It was a great effect. It was a fun little moment to play with. And then I really liked, as we wrap things up, you and I have both been singing the praises of David Livingston's directorial choices. And I think a lot of that has to do with the cooperation from the camera department, got Marvin Rush, and then whoever was lighting this show to make everything look really good. But what that gave us as we got toward the end is all these really heroic, just great Janeway moments. Her walking around, dramatic lighting, things are flashing around her, and she gets all the great lines like hell I will, and give me back control of my ship. This is classic. This is the Janeway that I'm here for.
Hey, all of you out there. Before we dive back in, we want to give a huge thanks to the folks who support us on Patreon.
Seriously, thank you. Thank all of you, because your support doesn't just keep the show running. It helps us create even more of the things that we all love, like Mission Log After Dark, exclusive interviews, behind-the-scenes updates, bonus content, everything. It's all because of you.
And if you haven't joined us yet, now's the perfect time. We've got weekly live chats for just about every flavor of sci-fi and fandom. We've got Farscape and Quantum Leap, The Twilight Zone in our Time Enough chats. We have Battlestar Galactica and So Say We All, and of course, Star Trek. and beyond.
We've even got Kon-Tiki, a weekly social hangout for casual chats and planning real-world meetups, plus an international chat so you can join the conversation no matter what your time zone is.
And we want to give a shout out to some of our recent supporters. Thank you to Ibo and Andrew and Brendan and Jeff and Oz Trekkie, Francisco, Chris, Richard, Tracy, Delaney, Daniel, Michael, and Kyle. Thank you, because you're helping make all of this possible.
Now, if you want to join them and get access to all that exclusive content and community, head over to patreon.com/missionlog.
That's patreon.com/missionlog, and we hope to see you all in the chats.
You seriously expect me to believe we're going to tell spooky stories around a space campfire and no one is making space s'mores?
Norman, I hate to tip my hat too soon when we do Mission Log. Because sometimes it's always just a surprise, what's going to happen when we get to the final part of our discussion. Do we love it? Do we hate it? What holds up? What doesn't? What did we learn? I have this thing here with this episode. This was the first note that I took when I watched it the first time of the rewatches for this. I think I just disagree with the whole premise. I think I disagree with the whole premise, and not the premise of taking an alien back to a more hospitable place in the quadrant. That just seems like Star Trek.
Yeah.
That just seems like what you do. There's a misunderstanding. We screwed up. We've got to figure out our way to reason our way out of the situation and do what's right. Okay. My problem is the premise. My disagreement is with the premise on how we deal with these kids. Okay? All right. 7, right at the beginning, comes in. Now, granted, maybe this is part of the problem, is entrusting any of this to 7 of 9. Maybe that's the problem. But I would also argue that of anybody, 7 would probably have the best perspective on this, but she states right up front that they haven't told the kids the truth because they have overactive imaginations. Okay. First of all, let me remind you that all these kids are Borg. And even if that weren't the case, kids are smart. And the respectful thing to do to kids is tell them the truth. Now, there is a huge difference between indulging fantasy and encouraging creativity. I mean, if you've, and forgive me if I'm speaking to an audience of 6-year-olds, but I don't think I am. I think our audience typically is older than that. But if you are a parent with a 6-year-old, you might want to cover their ears for a moment. If you were to indulge in the fantasy of, say, certain holiday characters, like a Santa Claus, something, that's great. I think that encourages creativity up to a point.
Right.
And it encourages imagination. I think that's great. Okay. That is different, though, from outright lying. And for what purpose exactly? They're in space. They're on a ship in space that faces danger no matter what. These kids are Borg. They have already faced danger because they were assimilated by the Borg. They've seen some horrible things.
They literally almost destroyed Voyager.
They almost destroyed Voyager. Thank you. Yes, yeah. So they know all this, and they could probably actually learn a valuable lesson from this whole ordeal about the humanity of Voyager's crew doing what they say they do, which is to do the right thing, which is also here the difficult thing by way of this alien. They could even be a part of it. How about a learning moment for these kids? So when we arrive at the end of our show, I'm going to talk about why I think this happened. But I think right from the get-go, that is a lot to swallow, and maybe we just pin it on 7 making some bad choices and not understanding it. Because, again, 7, for as far as she has come in the last nearly 3 years, right, she is still partly a child herself.
Right.
So I get that. And she sort of halfway took on this responsibility of working with these kids. It was also partly just put on her by Janeway. But I think that there was an argument to be made somewhere here a little better than what was made about why they can't know what's going on.
Yeah, I'm of two minds when it comes to this, because I agree with a lot of what you're saying here when it comes to one of the two premises of this episode. And you can almost feel that they're split down the middle. You have the storytelling component of this episode, Neelix and the children, and then you have the alien and the resolution, with Janeway being fantastically awesome Janeway, as we love Janeway, towards the end. But yes, when I did my first watch through, my reaction was, okay, I see how this is getting set up. I was like, a horror story to keep the Borg children occupied.
Yeah.
But then as the episode progressed, and as the children were more engaged with Neelix's story or lack thereof, the children were actually asking very good questions and poking holes in a lot of Neelix's quote-unquote memories, because he was doing what he was supposed to do, and they are acting as we expected them to act as the Borg children, which is basically saying they're like the analogy for us, they're the extension of the audience, and we're saying, no, Neelix, we know how a Bazaar collector works. We know that these things aren't exactly the way that you perceive them to be. You are telling us what we need to hear because we know that you're the distraction for us.
Well, and remember that these kids, yes, they are young, yes, they are immature, but they are also 7 in the respect that they have assimilated vastly more knowledge just by virtue of the fact that they were hooked up to the collective. So they have information, and they know how to get from logical point A to logical point B to logical point C. And that's why I love this scene of them just trying to figure out what the alien is. We're not interested. We're not interested in you being scared. We're just interested in figuring out the truth of the matter here. Because if it's this alien, we're going to do this. If it's this alien, well, you could have done this.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also think that it takes. If we take ourselves out of the story and look at it from more kind of like a real world perspective, I find that kind of compartmentalizing the information, because they believe, they being either Janeway or the officers or Neelix or 7 of 9, they as the adults believe that the children can't handle the truth of the information, is, I think, in a huge way, a disservice to actually, like you're saying, actually addressing how to speak to children when it comes to this is what needs to be told. This is the truth of the situation. Yeah. And I think that there are too many times that we see this more nowadays, where this is child's entertainment. This is just for kids. Star Trek was always about being able to reach all audiences, whether it's this certain age that can comprehend what Star Trek was saying, or the elder audience, which sees Star Trek for a completely different level of understanding and all of the different levels in between. Just to reference one of the newer Star Trek series, Star Trek Prodigy, that's why the children work so well in that series, because you can see them at the different levels of either being a child or being an adult watching children, actually affecting the story because the truth is being told to them, not around them, and not they're protected by their adults. No. So giving the children, the Borg children, that kind of agency in this episode would have given us, the audience, so much more growth with them, as opposed to them just trying to poke holes into, the ghost story that Neelix has been charged with. But here's kind of like the contrary part of how I saw this episode.
Okay,
I see this more as kind of like letting Neelix return to form in a way that Neelix is always good at. He's always good at being the heart of the ship. He's the morale officer, and he said so very early in the beginning. Yeah. And if you let him do what he needs to do, he's always in a position to try and find the best in the situation, whether or not he believes it himself. But he's true. I think that in his 6-year arc, that's where we're actually seeing kind of like the best of him. He knows that the kids are smarter than him, but he's going to tell the ghost story anyway, because that's what he's supposed to do. And he's supposed to make sure that they're distracted up to the point where they're no longer putting themselves or anyone else in danger. But then he has to actually put himself in danger. So with Tuvok, he's like, you know what? I'm not leaving you behind. That's not what Starfleet does. That's not what you told me to do.
Right.
Even if logic dictates that I have to actually go and leave you and save you in that way. No, that's not what family does. I love that about this version of Neelix. I also love that he believes that there was a happy ending for this alien entity that almost destroyed their ship. The positive side and the optimism of Neelix. He's like, you know what? That could have been any myriad of aliens that we could never understand that posed this particular situation.
There's another great Neelix moment that I really like here, which is this little exchange that he has with the kids about fear. Because I like Mazzotti admitting that she was afraid. Because remember, the others around her are like, oh, no, you're afraid. They're kind of making fun of her for it. But she's able to admit it. And it takes strength to be able to admit that anyway, especially when you're a kid, to get to some truth, to the heart of the matter. I like Neelix in this role of being the morale officer, also being a bit of the psychological support system for the kids, and making a case for the usefulness of fear. So he shuts down anytime that the others are sort of poking fun of Mazzotti by saying, like, no. Like, fear is a thing you have to deal with, but it actually warns you to get out of the dangerous situation. So you have to listen to that as well. You can't let it overcome you. Cut to him having to deal with his moment of fear and work his way through it with Tuvok talking him down. Those were nicely paralleled, and it made it not feel ridiculous, you know?
And I think that's it's a return to form where we've seen certain character-focused episodes almost pick up where the pause button left off, and we didn't really see any character growth. But I do like that we see this with Neelix, and I think there's a hugely missed opportunity that he could have been given a little bit more with these 4 children and Naomi, if Naomi ever comes back. I don't know. In a way where he's becoming, again, like this great uncle to all of these characters, where everyone kind of bounces off their kind of like their emotional needs to him. And we got a little bit of that in the earlier seasons, and I always found that really fascinating and a positive strength to the character. But we haven't seen that in a while, and seeing it in this episode made me realize, you know what, this was just a missed opportunity for him to be able to interact with these characters more and show that, you know, the ship is actually turning into a far bigger family than just adult crew members.
Yeah, agreed.
Now, speaking of our extended family of adult crew members.
Oh, wait, hang on. Do I need to slide the soapbox over your way?
Well, you know, I know this is probably like, the audience will be like, no, Norm, really, why are you getting into this? But it is something that I'm surprised in this episode that it actually kind of like came to a boil.
Yeah.
And this was when the doctor has been compromised because the power fluctuations caused him to disappear. And then Tom is severely hurt by the plasma burst to his face. And now he's not piloting Voyager. And he's not the doctor's backup med tech either.
No, all he can do is just go home and watch TV.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, or hope that, you know, his one good eye can look through the sextant, you know, to get him home. But this is kind of like, this is like the perfect example of what we've been talking about this entire time. We just talked about it in Lifeline when the doctor says, I'm going to be gone for 32 days. What's the worst that can happen? I don't know. You have a ghost on your ship. Right?
This could happen.
This could happen.
Yeah.
And it's manifesting itself in a very aggressive way while you're gone. Right? It could have caused havoc all over the ship.
Yeah.
And Tom could have been severely hurt while you were gone. And it's his only backup. So this actually proves there's no other medical staff aside from the one who I hope was working in the background with the tricorder trying to, I don't know, find some type of medical, I don't know, some type of comfort, you know, to give the crew that have been severely hurt. I don't know.
Did you notice that even Vorik got name-checked in the episode?
Oh, yeah.
And I can't remember the last time we saw him. But he got name-checked, and we didn't even see him. And I just keep thinking, like, oh, okay, come on. I know that this is a TV show. I know that the stars have to have their time on screen. But, here are all these opportunities now to just introduce us to somebody else. You brought back Tal Celeste. Right. Great. Still, if you're fighting a dangerous alien that is taking down crew member after crew member, where is the Baxter who can come in and handle this on his own?
Maybe going light on the snacks was a good idea after all. We've seen what happens when someone eats too many marshmallows.
So for 11 decks, we ain't afraid of no ghosts.
But then
deck 12...
Get to that other deck.
We weren't sure about the haunting, but we realized that it was just... Neelix was able to stack those books. Let's just say that. And if you get that reference, good for you. You're just as old as we are. So we are at the end of the haunting of deck 12. And as we do at the end of every Mission Log episode, we take a look at the episode, what we've discussed, and see if it boils down to one of two things. Does the episode hold up and stand the test of time? And does it have any morals, meanings, or messages that we were able to learn from the episode? So we had some great discussion, but in the end, did Neelix's ghost story move us? What do you say, John?
I gotta say no. Mm-hmm. And look, here's the thing, though. It's not because this is produced poorly or acted poorly. It's actually a really well-made episode of Voyager. It truly is. It is paced nicely, very effective shots, very good use of lighting. When we really ramp up, and it's Janeway just facing down her ship falling apart and trying to communicate this alien, there's some really good stuff there. So this is one of those rare cases where I'm going to say that it is a well-produced, not-so-great episode of Star Trek. Because at the end of the day, I have to ask why. Like, why are we telling this story in this way? And I think I know the answer. If you strip away all the pretense of Neelix telling a ghost story, if you just get rid of that part of it, and if you were to rewrite this episode where we're just focusing on the nebula creature and getting it home, it's a fine, if completely unremarkable Star Trek story about making contact and then getting something wrong. We made a mistake, and then trying to defuse that dangerous situation and doing the right thing. There is nothing wrong with that, but at least the way it's being told here, again, if you strip away all the other stuff, there's not a whole lot other meat on that particular bone. So it feels to me like you had that part of the premise, and you go, okay, here's a Star Trek story we could just plug in anywhere. So then it feels like the Neelix ghost story was written to pad an unremarkable story. And then I ask why, because I have nothing against the Borg kids being on Voyager. In fact, I think they're kind of a welcome and needed addition to expand and flesh out the crew and our experience with them a little bit more. I think they've mostly been handled pretty well, not always, but I think in general it's a good idea. But then it makes this type of story feel superfluous at best and maybe regressive at worst, because there's better things we can be doing with the kids, giving them a bit more agency, a bit more growth, a bit more curiosity. And if we're just going to do the alien story, there's more that could have been done with that. So it feels like two sort of half-baked ideas that if you're going to let Neelix do his thing, again, he's great, but if you're going to let him do this, I would want it to have more impact, more meaning, and really have some, maybe you don't need to introduce deep conflict over it, but I think you need to give him a bit more gravitas. Mm-hmm. So beautiful to look at, fun action scenes, clever use of camera and direction, but I don't think it's a really great episode. How about you?
I'm almost like everything that you said that you don't like about the episode, I do like about the episode.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because,
all right.
I mean,
lay it on me then. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually like this episode. Now, sure, is it, as we've said before on previous mission logs, is this the kind of like a GNDN episode, a go nowhere, do nothing episode?
Right.
Well, yeah, kind of. It's a bottle episode. But that doesn't necessarily, for me, make it bad. It just, it sets a certain expectation level for sure. But I kind of like the quieter bottle episodes from time to time. And maybe that's kind of what I needed in my viewing experience right now, where it's not a doctor-focused episode or a hologram rights episode or a Seven episode or a Borg episode per se. So I like that it wasn't, even for like the episode and the way that it concluded with action, wasn't really an action episode. Now,
right.
As you were saying, to be totally fair to this episode, I think that if Johnny wasn't given that part for Neelix to balance out the other half of the equation of this episode, probably wouldn't have fared as well. Like, say, if Seven was telling the story or the Doctor was telling the story, because as I said before in discussion, I do think that the one thing that they do right with Neelix, more often than not, is to show how much of kind of like this central heart of a character he is for the crew. And it makes sense because, he's the guy that feeds them. And usually the lunch lady is the person who people want to see.
Yeah.
Right?
That's very true. Yeah.
They hand you comforting bowls of food and maybe, an ear or two to listen to your daily problems. That's Neelix. Yeah. Right. So I'm glad that they were able to return him and give him something a little bit more meaningful to do than just, the occasional line or the occasional, contracted appearance. Now, accepting the premise of why Neelix was doing this, huge conceit, on the audience's part, because obviously he wasn't there for every single detail of the story. He had to invent, some of the details that he didn't get quite right. And I do love the children calling him on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because it's just his perspective. It is a story. It is there to distract them. But at the same time, it shows that they are paying attention and they want to know why they're being kept out of, or I should say, kept in the dark out of the truth of what is happening. But he keeps it in a way where they're engaged and the children are kind of like they're on his every word towards the end. But that makes for the better half of this episode, which is the second half of the story, because once it starts tightening up, the alien invader, if you will, the one that was mistakenly taken from its home in the nebula, when we start figuring that out, we're saying, oh my gosh, we're the ones who actually kind of shanghaied this alien and now it wants to get back, but it doesn't know how to communicate, but it does so with, well, no, it's not violence. It's actually just communication. We're trying to piece that together, and that's a very Star Trek-esque type of trope. Maybe it's a little too flippant of a word, but it's something in the tone of traditional Star Trek, which I like. So if I had to make a checklist of like the elements that I liked about this episode that qualify it for something that works for me, you have, like you said, David Livingston giving us a fantastically directed horror story type of episode. You have incredibly solid performances from all the actors, including the kids, which you're right, that could be a risky thing. Right. There's an old adage in the industry. It's like, kids, no pets. Right. They're just too risky and there are too many variables. But the kids were great. I love seeing them. I thought that I wouldn't be a big fan of them, but they always surprise me. And then you have this, what I think is a very solid and universal Star Trek message, something very traditional. That's something I'll be able to take into morals meetings and messages. But again, it's not incredibly dramatic. It's not incredibly action oriented. It's quieter, and it has a little bit of the kind of, I guess, connective tissue that I think needs to hold an episode together when it's not focused on like one of three major things that happens now in like the back half of Voyager, the Borg, Seven, or the Doctor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all right, you teased a little bit about the moral meaning message, and I came away with really two that I feel are they're not competing with each other, but I think they're competing for at least space in this episode and competing to have a cohesive message at the end. So here's how I look at those two, and I'll make this short and sweet. So from the perspective of the Voyager crew, so if we're in universe here, teasing out the moral meaning message, we have the age-old Star Trek message that I think you and I both get and we both like, and it's about respecting alien life, and it's about doing the right thing when it's the difficult thing, and working through a peaceful solution even when you're being threatened with violence. Like, that is exactly the time to double down on, no, we're going to find the peaceful way out of this. We're going to get you where you need to be. It's just all classic Trek, no question about it. So I think that's really solid. But here's the other thing. There's this competing message in this episode that is not the in-universe message. I think it's the one that is sort of resting kind of to the side, and that's the unimplied message to the audience, that it's okay to lie to kids. Because I don't think that's necessarily a message that needs to be there when it comes to, telling this ghost story. I think it's really a missed opportunity about what to do with these kids. So imagine if this had been the story where, okay, we actually try to do this. We think this is too dangerous a situation for the kids to know about, which it's not, because you're talking about this creature being on another deck where they don't go, where they can't go. There are places on the ship that are off limits to different people. We know that. And the Voyager crew is going about their job, which is to take this creature back to where it belongs, right? You actually missed this opportunity for somebody, whether it's Neelix or Seven or Janeway herself, to say, we're about to do this dangerous thing, but let me tell you the backstory and let me tell you why we're doing this thing, and actually make them participants in that process. Because that's how they learn, oh, wait a minute, this is what makes, dare I say, human values, or at least Starfleet values, something to aspire to that is in direct contrast to the values, quote unquote, that we have been living under with our Borg programming. Like, no, we actually get to do this thing that is positive, that is helpful. Yeah, it's difficult, but imagine the learning experience they could have from that. So I think the episode really screwed up here without being able to impart that message to these kids. We got a little bit of the yin and the yang here, as far as I see, with the moral meaning and message. How about you?
I mean, I do love that observation that you have about the kids. And I think that maybe in today's day and age, those types of characters can be crafted a little bit more, because I think that, children are watching more mature content in terms of like their fandoms, especially in Star Trek fandoms. So giving these children a little bit more agency as peers watching them on TV, that could be very helpful to them, because that's when we were growing up, we always wanted to emulate our heroes on TV. So giving them peer like heroes, that would be fantastic, if we actually saw them.
Yeah.
But, for me, I want to focus on the communications breakdown, like literally, and double entendre, if you will, because it's breaking down communications because communications actually broke down, trying to figure out where the comfort level is between these two different, I guess, kind of like the unstoppable force and the immovable object.
Yeah.
Right. So the unstoppable force being the entity, the immovable object being Janeway, because she won't leave her ship. And that's also something, very tried and true with the Star Trek captains. They want to protect their ship and their crew. But an alien trying to communicate, but in a way where is perceived as being hostile, is very Star Trek. We've seen that happen over and over again. Overcoming the communications breakdown. I mean, that's literally at the time where we usually watch the episode and it's a life or death moment. This is the whole, I'm not going to leave unless you return cold. Well, let me just read what Janeway said here.
Yeah.
So Janeway said about the attacks on the ship, she says, I'm not so sure they were random. Navigational sensors were fooling us into heading back towards the nebula. And then when Tob tried to resume course, he was attacked. The life form isn't trying to hurt us. It's trying to get home. So this is Star Trek 101. We can clearly see this type of misinterpretation in the same way, in the same threat that Voyager posed to Earth in Star Trek The Motion Picture. It was trying to communicate, but its signal was so powerful that it was actually attacking things that were trying to investigate where this entity is coming from.
Right.
Similarly, the whale probe. right?
Yeah,
In Star Trek 4.
yeah.
Remember, Spock logically, sussed out that the probe's signals are aimed at the Earth's oceans, which are being vaporized by the power of the signals, which was causing havoc to the entire biosphere.
Yeah.
But they were just trying to communicate with the whales that were hunted to extinction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I know some people will probably disagree with me, but and speaking of whales, there's a great scene, I believe it in Silicon Avatar, when Picard understands what the crystalline entity is actually doing. It's not randomly destroying and killing things. It is feeding because that's all it knows how to do. And it's a natural state. Like a whale. A whale comes and feeds hundreds of tons of shrimp, not because it wants to kill them. It's because it just knows how to feed in that way.
It's to eat. Yeah.
Right? So, some of these alien encounters, they're sentient life forms, but they're only... I guess the only way that they can communicate is perceived as a certain type of violence because the crew doesn't understand why it's lashing out the way it is. The only way of getting through that, as we learned, especially with Janeway, is a certain level of perseverance, a certain level of patience and faith, and a belief that sooner or later you will break through that barrier. But there is an actual truth that ignorance and fear obscures. And that's where I think it's really interesting that Icheb said this earlier on in the episode when he told Neelix, fear distracts people from accomplishing their goals. And the goals in this case were to communicate with an alien life form.
See, if only Icheb could have learned what was going on. Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Unimatrix Zero.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Chris Garris, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Shabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takachi. Neelix is many things: cook, morale officer, babysitter, and keeper of the furry toes. But the Crypt Keeper, he isn't. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.